Hello and welcome. This is Mouse Gunner, and we're back with some more Automation, the Car Company Tycoon game. Continuing on with the campaign roleplay of the Edison Car Company in 2011. And in this video, we're going to be looking at a brand new model for the Edison Car Company, the Edison Orbit. And jumping into the base trim for the Edison Orbit. What the Edison Orbit is a crossover vehicle. And what a crossover vehicle is it's a compromise between a standard sedan and an SUV. So it's a smaller SUV style vehicle. Honestly speaking, it is a standard sedan that's been jacked up and rebodied a little bit. And that's exactly what we've done with our model. So what I did was I took the same body I used for the Star, and I switched it to the 5-door hatchback variation of that body. In any case, starting off with the chassis, I have a monocoque chassis, AHS steel material, front transverse engine placement, McPherson strut in the front, and semi-trailing arm in the rear for the suspension, and the panel material is made out of corrosion-resistant steel, this is pretty much identical to what the Star had. Now, as far as styling goes, I tried to go a little bit more funky with the look, giving these spaceship style door handles and what have you, and giving it a funky paint scheme. As crossover vehicles like this tend to have that more funky, obnoxious look going for them. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm not really that big of a fan of the crossover vehicle concept. Now, one thing you can't really see here with the Orbit is that jacked up element, as the ride height actually doesn't translate into anything visible so far in the game. But we did go with this 5-door hatchback variation of the body that we used for the Star, and the variant that we used for the Star would have been this 4-door variant. The drive type is front-wheel drive, and the engines we're going to be using are pretty much the same engines we have for the Star. So our base trim has the 2.4 liter inline 4 that the Star had, and let's just give ourselves a quick reminder of the performance we can expect out of that engine. So it produces 167 horsepower and 151 foot-pounds of torque. Now, jumping into the actual trim setup, again, we're going to have some similarities with the Star. So we have a 6-speed automatic, as the Star did. The 5th and 6th gear are going to go beyond that estimated top speed to give us more fuel economy. The end result of that is a fuel economy of 27.7 miles per gallon, a 0 to 62 time of 9.4 seconds. We have a little bit of wheel spin at 6.8%. The tire setup is medium compound road with 17-inch rims. Tire width comes in at 215 in the front and 215 in the rear. This is slightly wider than what we had on the Star, so there are some slight changes from what the Star had. Also, I have alloy rim material as opposed to the steel rim material on the base Star, so we have a little bit of an upgrade there. And let's go ahead and take a look at the rim styling that I selected. As far as the brakes go, we have a solid disc 2 piston up front and solid disc 1 piston in the rear, and I have decreased the size of the brakes in the rear to balance out things. So pretty much I went down until we started having more brake fade in the rear to try and give a little bit less brake lockup, which gives us a penalty for a lot of our stats. As far as aerodynamics go, I have a fully clad under tray, and cooling airflow comes in at roughly 10 above what is required. For the interior, I have 5 seats, standard interior, premium infotainment. So this is a little bit of an upgrade for the standard trim. Pretty much all the trims that I have for the Orbit are going to have the same interior setup. So standard interior, but with a infotainment system. So again, I'm trying to go for maybe a younger audience. So we're trying to have a little bit higher spec entertainment to appeal to them. As far as driver assist go, we have power steering, ABS, traction control, and electronic stability control, all as standard for the same reasons I have discussed in all of my other videos. And we have standard safety. As far as suspension goes, we have standard springs, gas monotube dampers, and passive sway bars. And this is my overall suspension setup. And jumping into the test track, we have a top speed of 139.2 miles an hour. Let's switch it over to the airfield track. Weight distribution is a little front heavy. And the overall weight is a little over 3,300 pounds. So let's go ahead and get our track time. And the track time comes in at 1 minute 37.94. So jumping into the next trim, we're going to be jumping into another inline 4 powered trim, but this time with all-wheel drive. So if we come over to the body selection, rather than having it be transverse front-wheel drive, it is now transverse all-wheel drive. And hopping into the trim setup, starting with the gearbox. So again, the gearbox is an automatic with the 6-speed setup, and the gears are set up to be pretty much the same as they were before, with the fifth and sixth gear going beyond that estimated top speed to give us more fuel economy. The end result of adding that all-wheel drive system, though, is reduce the fuel economy down to 27 miles per gallon, and 0 to 62 time comes down to 10.4 seconds, and the power distribution of this is 60/40. Also, I do have a viscous LSD differential. I didn't mention that with the other trim, but all of the trims will have a viscous LSD with that differential setup. For the tire choice, this is going to be the same as the standard trim without the all-wheel drive, as will the brake setup, although the rear brakes are a little bit bigger because we have more weight to contend with, so I had to increase their size to reduce the brake fade. Aerodynamics should be the same, as it is the same engine. Interior setup is going to be the same, and you can expect this to be the same for all of the trims we're going to look at. And then we have the suspension setup, which might be slightly different because of the increase in weight and difference in weight distribution with that all-wheel drive setup. So if we jump into the test track, we now have a top speed of 134.9 miles an hour. Weight has gone up to over 3,500 pounds. Weight distribution is actually a little bit more even now than it was in the past. And it looks like we've lost a little bit in cornering G. So I don't think it will be too surprising when we have a little bit slower track time here, as we have reduced the three main stats that are going to determine overall track performance: top speed, acceleration, and cornering. So the performance we get is 1 minute 40 seconds, 0.29. And let's jump into the next trim, which is going to be a V6 powered trim. And this is also going to be all-wheel drive. Both of the V6 powered trims are going to be all-wheel drive. So starting off with the gearbox setup, actually I should start off with the engine. So this again is using the same V6 engine that was in the Star. So just to give you a reminder of its performance, we have 246 horsepower and 209 foot-pounds of torque. So jumping into the trim setup, starting with the gearbox, again we have a 6-speed automatic, and again the 5th and 6th gear are set up to be beyond that estimated top speed for more fuel economy. The end results of that is we have a 0 to 62 time of 7.9 seconds and a fuel economy of 26.2 miles per gallon. The tire setup is going to be the same as what we had with the other trims, as is the brake setup, except we do have to increase the brake size in the rear to again contend with more brake fade. The aerodynamics are going to be slightly different, as we do have more required cooling airflow, so we have to increase to correspond with that. The interior setup is going to be the same as I said previously. All these trims have the same setup, and the suspension setup is going to be probably slightly tweaked for an increase in weight, as we do have a heavier V6 up front. So when we jump into the test track, we do see that we now have a top speed of 151.8 miles an hour. Weight has gone up to over 3,700 pounds. And as far as distribution goes, it's still on the front heavy side. But comparing it to the front wheel drive version, I would say still slightly less front heavy than that, but definitely more front heavy than our other all wheel drive trims. Our cornering G continues to get a little bit worse. So I think we'll expect, though, a faster overall time, because we do have a faster acceleration and top speed. And that is indeed the result we get. So 1 minute 34.79. So the last trim we have to look at is a difference in engine. This engine is an engine you haven't yet seen, and it's a variant of the V6 engine we've already looked at. Let's hop into the engine. Starting off from the beginning, so we have a V6 with aluminum silicone block and head, just as the other variant dual overhead cam with 4 valves per cylinder, and it is a 3.2-liter displacement with VVL. We have a forged steel crank, I-beam steel con rods, and lightweight forged piston. Now, this is an EcoBoost engine. At least that's the idea behind it. And I could have gone with the low friction cast, which really would have improved the economy. But I didn't do that because of how high revving this engine is. The low friction cast really couldn't take it. And I was also trying to make this a compromise in performance between the V8 that we'll be seeing, what we did see in the Constellation, and the V6. So it kind of comes in between the two as far as performance numbers, because this is used in the place of that V8 and some of the models we'll be seeing in the future. So the compression comes in at 9.6, cam profiles at 33, VVL profile at 61, and we have EVT all cams. So this is a turbocharged engine, and this is the turbocharged setup I have. So the turbocharger uses a ball bearing setup and a water-to-air medium intercooler. The fuel system is a direct fuel injection with a single throttle, standard intake, and uses premium fuel, as opposed to the regular fuel that the rest of the Orbit engines use. Fuel mixture is at 15, ignition timing at 59, and RPM limit at 7,900. For the exhaust, we have short cast headers, as that is the only choice when you have a turbocharging system. Dual exhaust with a 3.5-inch exhaust diameter, high flow 3-way cat, and a straight through muffler. The end performance is 302 horsepower and 302 foot-pounds of torque. So if we jump into the trim setup here, starting off with the gearbox setup, again, we have the 5th and 6th gear going beyond the estimated top speed for more fuel economy, and the fuel economy we get is 26.6 miles per gallon, and a 0 to 62 time of 6.7 seconds. We do have 4.2% wheel spin, as this is a more powerful engine than the standard V6. Tire setup remains the same. Brake setup, we have a little bit of change with a vented disc up front to get rid of brake fade. We have a aerodynamics change as well, because this engine has more power. It requires more cooling airflow, so we've had to increase that as well. Interior remains the same with all the other trims. Suspension might be slightly tweaked because of changes in weight. In case jumping into the test track here, we've got a top speed of 162.7 miles an hour. Weight comes in at almost 3,900 pounds. It is more front heavy than any of the other trims we've seen thus far. But because of that increase in top speed and 0 to 62 time, even though we have a reduction in cornering G's yet again, I expect this to be our fastest trim. And that is indeed the case. We have 1 minute 32.16. Oh, and one thing I meant to discuss, and I forgot when we covered the cooling airflow, is that it has cooling flaps to give us a little bit more fuel economy. So without that, you can see we lose about a mile per gallon. So that is another addition for the Eco trim. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into the project setup, which I did more or less the same setup I do with all of my other models. I wasn't really sure of how to place the focus with this model, so I just kept it in the middle at 50 for both the model and the engine. For the factory setup, I have a large factory, and I have 80 automation and 2 shifts for the production. And I figured out of the different trims that I have, the most popular one would probably be the inline 4 powered all-wheel drive trim. And then I thought close behind that would be the front-wheel drive trim because of its affordability. And then I thought the next 2 most popular in the order would be the V6 and then the Eco Boost engine close behind. Although maybe switch these 2 around. It's hard to say exactly which one would be popular out of the 2. But moving on to the V6 factory, I have a large factory, and automation is again set at 80, but shifts is set almost all the way down to the bottom. It's a couple ticks above that. I do have a little bit of overproduction of engines. I couldn't get it perfect so that it was just right. When you have two different variants of an engine, you have to kind of divide the production amongst them. And if I bring down the shift even a single tick, I couldn't produce enough engines for both, so I have to overproduce technically for both. So I have more of the production going towards the turbocharged engine, but actual numbers I have is less because this takes more time and effort or resources to build. Moving on to the factory setup for the inline-4 engine, I actually went down to a medium factory as I didn't need quite the production volume as I had with the V6 engines. And I have automation again set at 80, shifts this time is set at 2.3 so that we could get the engines close to the required number. Now, if I had used a large factory instead, even bringing the shifts all the way down, I would have produced way more engines than I would have needed. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of a change here to my previous videos, and I'm not going to cover the market data tab. And the reason for that is building some of the other models that we're going to be looking at in the future. I'm still finding this tab to have a lot of issues, especially with price. One of the big issues that I encountered was the V6 engine. For some reason, that trim cost significantly less than the naturally aspirated trim, which technically makes absolutely no sense. So I'm not really going to feature that as long as that continues to be the case. Let's go ahead and do a comparison of the Orbit and the other models I have covered in videos so far. So as far as drivability goes, the Orbit's a pretty strong performer. With the base trim, it's matching the best performance we got out of the Star. And at its best, with the all-wheel drive trims, we are matching the best performance that we got out of the Constellation. So pretty strong performer here. Now, we do have quite a bit of a dip here with the turbocharged EcoBoost engine. But as you can see with the Luna, that is usually what you see with the turbocharged engine. You see quite a bit of a penalty and drivability. As far as sportiness goes, we're more or less matching the numbers we got with the Star if you compare things together. Except we have a slight boost here because of the higher performance of the turbocharged EcoBoost engine. And we are clearly not doing quite as well as we did with the Constellation, which makes sense as the Constellation does have more powerful engines, as well as a number of other things benefiting it. As far as comfort goes, it's hard to compare things here because we have every trim here having the premium infotainment system, but we don't have premium interior. So we can't, for instance, compare the premium trim we have with the Star because this has both premium interior and premium infotainment. But the standard trim only has standard entertainment system, not a premium entertainment system. So it's hard to compare the trims that we see here, but this is a decent performer for the most part, kind of in the middle of the standard trim here and the premium trim of the Star, for instance. As far as prestige goes, again, that premium infotainment system is going to give us a little bit of a boost. So comparing our standard base trim with the standard base trim of the Star, it's a slight boost here, but pretty close. Safety is a little bit higher with the Orbit compared to the Star, but considering that we have more weight, I think that's where we're getting that from. Practicality-wise, though, this is our strongest performer, outperforming our previous strong performer in the Luna. Off-road ability, this is a pretty strong performer as well. First off, we have a lot of these trims having all-wheel drive, but when you go to the front-wheel drive trim, we're only matching the performance we got with the Star before. So not too much of a benefit there. As far as utility goes, we do, again, have a definite increase over what we had with the Star. Although comparing again the two base trims, they're pretty much identical. It's mostly with the all-wheel drive trims that we have that big boost. Reliability-wise, more or less the same across the board except for that EcoBoost engine, which is slightly less reliable, which being a turbocharged engine I think makes sense. And we are matching the numbers that we got here with the Constellation at its worst, and considering this is a turbocharged engine and these aren't, that's pretty good, I would say, for the most part. But we're mostly matching, I would say, the numbers we got with that Constellation. So, kind of falling in between the Constellation and the Star here with reliability. As far as fuel economy goes, we dipped down a little bit from the Star's performance. I mean, we're using the same engines, but we have more weight to contend with, and this is a bit bigger vehicle overall. So I don't think it's too surprising that we have, for instance, 28 miles per gallon versus 29 miles per gallon in the two base trims here that are both front-wheel drive. And the EcoBoost engine here is matching the numbers we got with our inline 4, with, all-wheel drive being in both of these trims. So that is kind of something we were going for with the EcoBoost engine here, outperforming the fuel economy we had with the naturally aspirated V6, and we're getting more power out of it as well. Now, I would say if you actually looked at the exact numbers, now these are rounded a little bit, the inline 4 engine probably has slightly better fuel economy than the EcoBoost engine, but it's probably pretty close. As far as weight goes, our EcoBoost engine is the heaviest, and our base trim without the all-wheel drive system is obviously our lightest. And we do have almost an increase of 100 pounds over the base trim of the Star. But you have to keep in mind that we do have that premium infotainment system, which is going to be adding on a little bit of weight as well. As far as emissions go, pretty similar performance that we got with the Star, slightly worse, for instance, when you compare things directly, so standard trim versus standard trim here. But the EcoBoost engine does make up for that a little bit, and we also have slightly worse with our inline 4 engines. As far as production units go, again, we have slightly higher numbers than what we saw with the Star, as well as slightly higher costs than what we saw with the Star as well. But again, you have to consider the fact that that premium infotainment system is standard on the Orbit and not the Star. Now, as I discussed, you can see here that the EcoBoost engine has the highest production units as well as the highest cost, but I've been noticing this issue when you look at the market data where the EcoBoost engine tends to be more affordable, sometimes the most affordable trim out of all of the trims that I have here, and that's the case with some future models that we'll be seeing as well, which honestly makes absolutely no sense when you compare these things. In any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. This is Mouse Gunner, signing out.